particular. And I know we've lost a little time, but I think we can just proceed now. I see colleagues are back on, those who could rejoin. So let's go, Marin.
Okay, I'll just dive in. And Devin, if you can get the PowerPoint up, that would be fantastic. If you want me to do it, let me know. But for now, I'll just keep talking. So I was talking about energy insecurity. We were talking about instability, supply chain disruptions due to COVID, labor strikes, sabotage, war, the geopolitical instability that's going on. You know it all. I don't need to tell you about it. Thanks, Devin. The technological disruptions that are going on, AI has come on and suddenly we're talking about a massive new demand for energy that wasn't even in our thinking before. Electric vehicles and, the resulting energy shift, the demand that they're going to require from electricity, how that's going to change the situation for the demand for oil. Right now, that's not really a big issue. I believe in 2022, they only reduced the demand for oil by 1.5 million barrels, but it's projected that by 2040, that could displace the demand for oil by over 20 million barrels per day out of about 100 million barrels per day it's consumed now. So that's going to be another change and disruption. So in the face of all this instability, energy security has become a real top priority globally. And that is really the key driver of why we're having this conversation about a new economy, is countries want to reduce their reliance on importing foreign sources of energy. They want to be able to control it themselves, and they're turning to clean energy, which is the cheapest new energy source. It's rapidly deployable, scalable, and it's not, excuse me, vulnerable to supply chain disruption. So next slide. So the first thing I normally say is follow the money. And if we look at recent years on the left, you're seeing a chart about investments in the clean energy and the energy transition, nearly $2 trillion in 2023, up 17%. And I just want you to look at the uptick there, how things are going up. For every dollar that's going into fossil fuels today, almost $2 are invested in clean energy. And that's what it's showing you in the graph on the right. A little bit hard to see, but the colored bars are clean energy and the stable or the light blue bars are fossil fuels. So 2 to 1 now investments in clean energy versus fossil fuels. And I really encourage you to look at the last 5 years. Part of Canada's challenge around this is that this has happened very quickly. You can see how those graphs are going up quickly and how the fossil fuel and clean energy investment was on par around 2017. So it's been under a decade that things have really rapidly changed. And if you listen to folks like Fatih Birol from the International Energy Agency, in his words, the rise in clean energy spending is underpinned by the strong economics, by the continued cost reductions, and by energy security. So next slide, please. And so we're talking about costs. I'm sure that you've been following some of these things, but this is just one chart from, again, the IEA that's showing all of the energy sources and how the costs are dropping. And so over the last 4 decades, solar power has transformed from one of the most expensive electricity sources, really one that was like an ideological nice thing to do, to now being the cheapest in most countries. You can just look at that graph. Photovoltaic costs fallen by 90% in the last decade. Onshore wind dropped by 70%. Batteries dropped by more than 90%. I don't need you to understand all the numbers, but just that you see those cost drops are precipitous. They are enormous. So the results, more money going into solar PV than all of the other electricity technologies combined. And wind and storage adoption rates are coming on very fast as well because of the cost drops. Next slide. And that's really what's happening. Clean technologies are taking off. So again, look at the last 5 years. We had very small, on the left is electric vehicles uptake, and then the last 5 years, things are taking off. In 2023, nearly 1 in 5 cars sold globally was electric. 1 in 5. This is predominantly 95% of them were in China, Europe, and the US. We aren't seeing that story the same way here in Canada because it's not happening the same way. It's happening around the world, though, and that is going to impact Canada. In 2022, EV sales saw a 35% year increase, and that's 6 times higher than what was happening 5 years ago. So again, I'm reinforcing the 5 years because for Canada, we have to catch up in our thinking because things changed so quickly in the last 5 years. And yes, there's been talk about EV slowdowns, and I'm sure we've all been hearing about that. And in Q1 and Q2 of last year, there was a slowdown in EVs because of the production of them had slowed down. A lot of companies didn't have their supply chains in order. If you look at companies like Tesla or Hyundai, there was no slowdown because they had their supply chains together. But by the end of 2023, or by the end of this year, we're seeing the take off. We're seeing sales up to where they were before. So in Canada, EV sales hit a record 13% in 2023. In the fourth quarter, in places like British Columbia and Quebec that have had ZEV mandates, zero emission vehicle mandates, sales were around 20%, just over 21%. Next slide. So this technology takeoff is happening. So what does this mean for us? Is this an opportunity for Canada, or is this actually a threat for Canada? And I feel that's what many people are feeling. And we see it in the elections happening. People are concerned. They don't understand. Is this a threat to my way of life, to my job? And we've historically been a natural resource-based economy. We have a large focus on oil and gas, and globally, things are changing for all of the sectors, including oil and gas. And it's not clear what the rate of change is going to be. We will be using oil and gas for decades to come. Let's be clear. It's not that we are going to stop using it, but how quickly is that change going to happen? Is the decline going to happen? Is the decline going to happen in Canada's sectors? That isn't actually clear. But what we do know is that these new opportunities are growing and taking off. And what we do know is that those who take action now are going to be the ones who are the winners, because a lot of this global capital is looking for places to invest, to build these new technologies, whether it's batteries, wind, solar, heat pumps, etc. And once those investments are made, those manufacturers are going to be in place. So what are Canada's opportunities? So first of all, clean technology. We punch way above our weight on clean technologies. We produce great things. Last month, I was in Owen Sound, Ontario at Hydrogen Optimized. Very interesting company. They're manufacturing cutting-edge hydrogen electrolyzers that could be exported as a technology system to produce hydrogen. Using an old plant that used to produce car parts that shut down. It's a great story of shifting from old economy to new economy. And we've got companies like this across the country. So technology, a second opportunity for Canada, clean energy, green hydrogen, electricity exported to the US. Colleen's going to tell us all about it, so I'm not going to. The third picture from the left there is GE Vernova in Canada producing wind turbines and wind plants, sorry. The third opportunity, and Adam will tell us more about it, is clean products, clean cement, clean steel, clean aluminum. On the far left there, we've got Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie. They are reducing 3 million tons of CO2 by switching to electric arc furnaces for coal. There is a demand for low carbon steel to produce those electric vehicles. Not really a price premium yet. That's where we need to get to. But the demand is out there for producing lower carbon products. And we'll hear more about that. Some other examples of that in Canada, Heidelberg in Edmonton, which I think Adam might be talking about in terms of low carbon cement. So the story here is $2 trillion went into the clean economy globally last year. That number is going to grow. It's growing every year. You saw it. Investors are looking for opportunities for places with stability. That's Canada. Predictability, meaning we need a predictability of policy, and if the investment climate needs to be predictable, not flip-flopping of policy, ripping things up and switching them, and we need rule of law. So Canada, we have an abundance of clean power, best skilled market in the world, proximity to major markets like the United States, we really have an opportunity to attract billions of dollars in this new economy. And we're seeing the electric vehicle ecosystem, for example, taking root in Ontario and in Quebec. And we have an opportunity to attract those billions of dollars to help decarbonize our traditional industries like steel and cement, because they will be part of this new economy, creating jobs here. So I'm going to go to my last slide because I know we're short on time here. How do we win? Now just go back one slide there, Devin, to how do we win? I'm not going to do, oh yeah, you got it there. How do we win? Sorry. One, get things built fast. This is Canada's biggest problem. Takes us a decade to permit anything. We need to be doubling the size of our electricity in Canada. How are we going to do that if we require permitting and it's on the slow track, often on the junior staffers in governments, no efficient systems to get things through? This is something that we can fix, streamline, maintaining our environmental standards. We're not talking about reducing standards. We're not talking about not engaging with Indigenous communities. They need to be part of this with meaningful equity roles in building this new economy. But we need to be able to do this far more efficiently, and we could. Secondly, we need to give certainty. First and foremost is that we need to replace this partisanship around the economy with certainty. We need to signal what the investment environment is going to be and continue with it. Things like investment tax credits, some form of industrial carbon pricing. It can change names, but we need to have bipartisan support for these types of policies and keep them consistent. That is what's going to attract capital to Canada. We need to give industry the confidence that they need to make these 20 to 30-year decisions, not that the rules of the game are going to change while their money is getting invested. That's what's keeping money out of Canada. We can change that. Thirdly, we need to seize every opportunity. There are new sectors, new opportunities, whether it's batteries, hydrogen, energy storage, new forms of electricity. There's a lot of new technologies out there that we're talking about. Nuclear is going to be a big piece of this. We need to move forward with them and solve this is going to help solve the productivity crisis in Canada by unleashing these new technologies and not strangling them. And then lastly, we need to be ambitious. We aren't starting from zero. We have, some other companies here today. We have a network of companies in Canada that are already doing this. We know how to do this. It's using the skills of labor, electricians, engineers, etc., that we already have, and just shifting them over to really building this new opportunity for Canada. And I think I'll leave it there. I've got some trends to continue, but we'll do that if we get time later, because I know we're short on time.
Thank you so much, Maren. That was quite a sweep and a very helpful one. And thank you to everyone for your patience. Glad to see people are back on. Apologies again for that glitch, but I'm not going to waste our time on that. I'd like to now switch gears and turn things over to you, Adam. And of course, Maren has already made reference to some of the good work that you're involved in. So over to you, Adam Auer.
Great. Thank you very much, Senator Coyle. I'll wait for Devin to pull my presentation up as well, but it's just a very quick snapshot of the industry because most people don't know much about cement and concrete, despite how central we are to modern economies. I'm going to talk a little bit about why decarbonization matters to our sector and what we're doing about it. And then I want to back into the decarbonization or net zero conversation from an economic perspective and pick up on some of the things that Maren was just pointing out. So next slide, please. Just a little bit about cement and concrete. We are a ubiquitous industry. We have about 15 cement manufacturing facilities across the country, over 1,000 concrete production sites, worth about $76 billion in economic activity to Canada, with over this 158,000 is actually an old number, it's about 166,000 direct and indirect jobs. hugely important economically and distributed across the country. I think that's sort of one of the unique things about the sector as well, that we are present in just about every community, or as we like to say sometimes politically, every riding across the country. Next slide, please. Concrete is also the most important construction material. We use more concrete than all other building materials combined. In fact, we use more concrete than just about anything else except for water, just to give you a sense of scale. I think one of the ways to think about it is I've come to start talking about concrete a little bit like energy. Energy is sort of one of those things that we take for granted in our economy, but it is the feedstock that drives just about every economic sector. And concrete is much the same. There are very few economic activities in Canada that don't depend to some extent on concrete, whether it's public infrastructure like hospitals, schools, community centers, utilities, oil and gas infrastructure, renewable energy infrastructure, wastewater infrastructure, manufacturing facilities. Just about every sector of the economy needs concrete on some level. And so we see it as an essential commodity. It's also got a bit of an export story, which most people don't totally appreciate. About 40% of the production of cement products in Canada are exported to the United States. Another reason why it's an important driver of Canada's economic interests. Next slide, please. But you imagine if you're producing a material that's consumed in greater quantities than everything else except for water, that there's an environmental impact, and that's certainly true for cement, in particular on the GHG side. About 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions come from the production of cement to make concrete around the world. That's a global number. In Canada, it's somewhat smaller at about 1.4% or 10 megatons of our national emissions, but still obviously very significant. And going back to sort of the point about the central role that concrete plays in the built environment, it's simply impossible to imagine decarbonizing our economy, our built environment, without decarbonizing cement and concrete. It's not possible. And so that's a commitment and a responsibility that our industry takes very seriously. Next slide, please. In 2023, just about a little over a year ago, we outlined our roadmap to get to net zero. This is an industry-wide commitment, so it's not just the cement sector, but in fact, the entire cement and concrete value chain that came together to problem solve what net zero looks like for our sector. We were very careful also to consult with organizations like Marin's former organization, the Transition Accelerator, Clean Prosperity, the Climate Institute, to make sure that we were on the right track and sort of had the credibility of some of the deepest thinkers on climate and industrial decarbonization in Canada. Next slide, please. And we came up with a roadmap that we think is quite ambitious. 40% reductions of GHG emissions by 2030, almost 60% by 2040, on the road to net zero by 2050. And there are sort of two important aspects to our plan that I think are important to understand. One is this is true net zero. We're not looking at offsetting our emissions by buying forests somewhere in the world or anything like that. This is direct emissions from our sector. And then the second piece, which comes on the next slide, is that we are modeling based on today's technologies. So we are not, next slide, please, Devin. We are not anticipating some future magic bullet technology that's going to solve all our problems. Our model uses technologies that are what we would call TRL 6 or above today, meaning that they may be expensive, but we know they work. Next slide, please, Devin. And here you can see sort of where they sort of break down in the value chain of our sector. So we really looked, right from the earliest part of our value chain, the manufacturing of clinker and cement, through the production of concrete, through the use of concrete in the built environment, through improved construction practices, through the use of advanced technologies like CCUS, to parcel out where we think reductions are going to come from. Next slide, please. But the other important thing, I think, in particular to this committee, is that while that roadmap shows that there are things that we can do alone as an industry in terms of investment and technologies, et cetera, what it really shows is that net zero is not possible without collaboration. And so we need a market that is willing to accept and in fact incentivizes low carbon solutions, that is willing to accept the changes that come along with that. We need policies that support investments in decarbonized technologies. And we need transparency and disclosure. We need good information that helps the market make good decisions about low carbon products, low carbon cements. And we need a very significant education and engagement strategy with government and with other actors to help with the transition management, helping people adapt to change. We hate change, as we all know. As a species, we're not very good at change, and this transition to a decarbonized economy, even if in many ways I believe it will be a much better economy and provide all sorts of improvement to our lifestyle, it's still change, and there are barriers that must be overcome, and that's certainly true in the construction sector. And so a big part of our action plan is not just what we're doing on the manufacturing side, but what we're doing with governments, with the construction sector, with groups like New Economy Canada, to help manage this transition and make sure that the market is ready for the changes that are coming. Next slide, please. The last two slides I want to talk about, I think, are really the most important ones, and it's what I think Marin was sort of touching on. What are the conditions of success? So, we've been looking at net zero to a great degree through the climate lens, but what groups like the Cement Association of Canada, New Economy Canada, and others are trying to do is talk about how this really is an economic issue, is an economic challenge, and what we need are the right economic conditions to attract the investment that's going to accelerate this transition and position Canada to do well in a global economy that's changing. I think Marin already laid out quite well that the economy is changing whether we like it or not. It's up to Canada to make decisions to make sure that it's prepared to succeed in the face of those changes. And that is absolutely the case when it comes to cement. We are multinational companies that operate facilities around the world, publicly traded. Our investors are concerned about carbon as a liability, and they want to see that we have a credible, robust, transparent plan to get to net zero if they're going to spend dollars in our sector. And those dollars are going to the facilities and to the companies that are able to demonstrate that they have that plan in place, and also that they are operating in jurisdictions with the right partners to make sure that those plans will be successful. And in Canada, it's no different. One of my biggest jobs as the head of the Cement Association of Canada is to make sure that Canada is an attractive destination for capital to reinforce the domestic supply of cement, which I've already described as an absolutely essential commodity to our economy, that we're able to sustain and hopefully enhance the employment that the sector provides to Canadians across the country, and that we're able to expand our export position. And increasingly, that depends on decarbonization. And so what are the next slide? What are the conditions that allow us to continue to strengthen our position economically while meeting this decarbonization challenge? Next slide, please. I think this is my last slide. Again, picking up on many of the things that Marin already said. A predictable fiscal and regulatory environment. These are in many ways traditional metrics for attracting investment and having competitiveness industries. Now we need to layer onto that the decarbonization, fiscal and regulatory environment. So a deep commitment to investment in infrastructure, preferably decarbonized and climate resilient infrastructure, a predictable cost of carbon. So, I imagine going to get into some questions about industrial carbon pricing and the role that it plays in attracting investment, but that stable cost of carbon is absolutely important, along with the incentives that come along with that for R&D, technology development and deployment in our sector and others. And of course, doing that in a way that is cognizant of what's happening in our competing jurisdictions so that we don't fall behind, but also so that we don't get so far ahead that we end up disadvantaging our domestic industries against importers that have weaker or non-existent emissions policies. And we can get into all the tools that are available to do that, and there are many. The second is resilient, affordable, and sustainable supply chains. Marin already talked about Canada's clean energy advantage. That is certainly a crucial part of what we are talking about when we're talking about resilient, affordable, and sustainable supply chains. But that also applies in our sector to raw material inputs. So making sure that we have access to clean materials, increasingly circular economy materials, innovative uses of waste materials from other sectors. For example, we use waste materials from steel and other manufacturing industries as inputs that allow us to give new economic value and life to those materials. We need to kind of double down on those types of technologies. Carbon capture, utilization, and storage, another technology that is both essential to the cement and concrete industry's decarbonization, but again, one where Canada, if it plays its cards right, has a huge global advantage at the moment. And finally, removing barriers and creating market incentives for investment. So, beyond sort of the regulatory stuff that we're familiar with in terms of GHG limits and regulations or costs on carbons, we also need to be creating a market pull so that, as a way of helping the market kind of overcome its adversity to change. In the construction sector in particular, any change is seen effectively as risk. And so what are some of the policies that we need to do to de-risk either the actual risk or the perceived risks of low carbon solutions for the market? There's an ample list of red tape reduction initiatives that I'm sure you're all familiar with, but one that I know Marin has been a strong advocate for, and we've certainly been working alongside her on this particular issue, is value-driven procurement. So how do we use Canada's fiscal power? About 40% of all construction materials are purchased by one level of government or another. How do we take advantage of that to demonstrate for the market that low carbon solutions are effective, they can reduce emissions, they can give you the performance that you need, and they are cost competitive with traditional solutions in the market? Government has a real role to use that buying power to de-risk these solutions for the rest of the market, and to move away from prescriptive solutions. So, having government tell industry how to do its job. Government should be setting standards for the level of performance, whether on carbon or climate adaptation or other performance metrics, and allow industry to provide the innovative solutions to meet those needs. And I think I'll leave it there to leave some time for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. Very, very interesting what's going on in your industry. I'm going to turn it quickly now over to Colleen, just conscious of our time, and I know she's got some very important things to share with us about the renewables industry. So over to you, Colleen.
Thank you very much, Senator. And fortunately, I'm a quick speaker, so I will try to slow down. So I am not a total terror to the translator, but we'll move through quickly here. Just for some context setting, I have the privilege of working with Innergex Renewable Energy, which is a Canadian success story. We were founded in Quebec in 1990, and 30 years later are now a multinational corporation, pure play renewable energy company. We develop, own and operate wind, solar, hydro, and battery storage facilities across Canada, the United States, in Chile, and in France. We also had the privilege of being one of the first companies to co-own and develop our facilities with Indigenous nations. The first of those co-owned projects has now been operating for 20 years in Ontario. We have 5 operating facilities across the country on that model, and the full suite of our development activities in Canada are being done that way. As has been mentioned already, I'll gloss over my slides on the company. Please, Devin, and go to slide 4. As has been mentioned, Canada is competing for investment from companies like Innergex, as in any other industry, with other countries around the world, like the United States, Europe, Latin America. The places and jurisdictions that provide the best conditions to invest and have the durable operating conditions will be the ones that attract this investment. We have a responsibility to our shareholders to be able to generate that return on their investment in the projects that we develop, and the places where we can do that with certainty and with speed will be the ones that are more attractive for the investment to flow to. Also important for contextual information, building a renewable energy project does take, at the utility scale, does take several years. A key part of that is doing the appropriate level of work to earn social acceptability on the project and to build those Indigenous partnerships so that we can co-invest in them. It's not a quick one meeting here, let's do a deal. These are hundreds of millions of dollars that need to be invested in a lot of trust and learning about the projects that have to happen over time. But we do have, as Marin referenced, ample opportunity here in Canada to remove inefficiency from our regulatory process so that we can spend our time doing the right things, but get projects into the ground and generating emission-free electricity faster. So how do we do this? The first is as I mentioned, need for speed. The demand is significant. There's lots of different references for how much we need to add. It's effectively between now and 2050, we need to do what we did in the last 50 years. We have a lot more tools and capital at our disposal now, though, so we should feel confident that we'll be able to get there if we put our pedal to the metal. The risk we have historically with electricity planning is a sense that if we build too much, we'll have a surplus, and then that will affect and impact ratepayers. Where we are today, the risk of building too much does not exist. We are going to have a hard time physically getting enough new electricity into the system to maintain Canada's competitive advantage with that low-cost emission-free electricity that's the backbone for all the other economic activity. And so when we're making our policy choices or starting to pick which direction we're going, taking that historical sense of, oh no, we might build too much, we need to throw that out the window. Collectively, and Canada, like the United States, electricity policy and choices are driven by the subnational government, so the provinces and the states, but we need a degree of consistency and clarity that over time, this is where we are going. And so that the really important work, as I referenced, it needs to happen in communities today to build that trust and understanding about the projects so we can develop them, is able to be started. Because when it's a stop-start, nope, we're not going to need any more. Oh, now all of a sudden we do need some and we need some tomorrow. Now we don't need any more. It's extremely disruptive to investment, and companies will not be able to take the time in building that social acceptability that underpins modern infrastructure. We also need to continue to have a proactive investment and enabling of transmission infrastructure, which is key to enabling the electricity to get to the new industrial demand, the mines, the factories, the data centers, as well as the neighborhoods and households that need the power going forward. And just to really punctuate, not starting now puts Canada's future economy at risk. It puts the economy of 5 years from now at risk, and it puts the economy of 20 years from now at risk. The second key thing to be focused on is that the policy ecosystem that we're creating, next slide please, Devin, needs to be durable. As I mentioned, these projects are hundreds of millions of dollars and they're multi-decade investments. And so what we need to ensure that we can continue to choose to invest here is that policy stability. So examples of things like the ITC that's created right now, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank funding, those are things that get factored into the financial case and model for a project that then gets bid to a utility right now with a commitment for a 30-year price on the electricity. So we need to have a sense of confidence that that tax credit or that funding will be there for that 30 years, or the project's economics can be put at peril and then the project may not go forward. And so we need that long-term stability of the financial supports. Same with permitting and we've lived over the last 20 years, permits being required, permits not being required, permits being required again on the same piece of infrastructure. And so we need to get a lot more clear and consistent about providing that multi-decade ecosystem. And I mentioned stop-start. So next slide, please. The other big one I wanted to focus here is that we need to keep our eye on unintended policy consequences. We have a system of government that was organized for the 19th century, the way our economy worked, the way we managed issues, and it's very siloed. And today we're dealing with cross-cutting wicked problems that that impact everything. And so choices like we're going to protect the habitat of a certain kind of bird nest. I'm all for protecting the bird. It's nothing against the pileated woodpecker, which is my example here. But the consequence of that is potentially sterilizing any sort of infrastructure development in most of the country for multiple years. And so decisions on protection that's happening within ECCCC need to be considered across the economic policies. Tariffs on or responding to a tariff environment, and we're likely heading into an era of a lot of discussion around tariffs and a lot of retaliatory tariffs, understanding what the consequence of that is on other things that are very important to us domestically. If we slap a big tariff on a component of a battery or a solar panel coming in from Asia right now, what does that do to our ability to rapidly scale up the renewable electricity that we need to power the economy in Canada? And so we need to start to look at these things across ministries, across agencies, and across sort of the traditional buckets that we think about issues in to really look at what the potential unintended consequences are. So be clear on the goal that we have, clear on our principles, and use that to inform the choices that consider the broader implications. If we get this right, we can unleash Canada's economy and we will thrive in the net zero world. We also have the opportunity to enable unprecedented economic reconciliation and prosperity for Indigenous communities, recognizing that this generation of infrastructure build-out is being done in partnership and co-ownership. And we have the ability to build out a reliable and resilient energy system that allows Canadians to not only just survive the changing climate and extreme weather events, but to thrive through it. So I'll leave it there, recognizing time, and thank you very much for your attention this morning.
All right, thanks very much, Colleen. That was an excellent presentation, as were the other two. I just wanted to mention, I know people are on a schedule. We had intended to finish around 9:15, and that was going to include about 15 minutes of questions. So my plan today, moderating the questions, is that we're still going to have 15 minutes of questions if our panelists can kindly stay with us. But if you have to hop off, senators, please put your questions in the chat and we'll talk about them, and this will be recorded and it's going to be circulated as well, and it will be going on the Senators for Climate Solutions SharePoint. So again, thank you. Thanks, Mary Coyle, Senator, for inviting me to moderate the Q&A today. And we're going to do this like committee. We're going to have rapid fire questions. We're going to have a minute for a question and try to keep a minute for answers. And that way we can get in as many as we can. I'm going to start the ball rolling with a question to Maren. You talked about moving fast. And I wonder if you can give me a sense of what types of emission policies and EIA processes are needed generally for innovative clean tech opportunities. And how does industry feel related to working towards federal and provincial EIA harmonization?
Thanks for the question. Moving fast. So there's a couple of pieces of this, but I'm going to focus on the permitting side, since whether it's electricity, which, we need the infrastructure, we need the electricity to power the new economy. I'd say that's perhaps our biggest hurdle right now. I'll let industry talk about, their perspective on the harmonization. What I know from talking with governments is that these systems, there is not a systems approach to this. There is a siloed approach, as Colleen was saying, where it goes to one ministry, it sits on one person's desk, and this is not considered a senior job. This is a junior job that goes through the permitting. There is not a requirement, you must get these many permits passed per week. The system is designed to be slow rather than designed to expect results, to expect these permits to run through, that there would be I think there should be something like a publicly visible website where you can go to understand where is this in the permitting process, where there's a commitment from government that you will get through the permitting process in X number of months, and then there's an accountability mechanism for it. So I think that would be a piece of it. Secondly, is bringing Indigenous involvement in early. It's ensuring that there's the capacity on the Indigenous side to engage in this. That's, obviously there's been over a century of lack of attention on the Indigenous side. And so capacity is a clear issue that they are asking for support on that. So we need to ensure that. We need to be clear about why, what are the opportunities, and ensuring that there's benefits for all parties, whether it's the Indigenous piece of it or municipalities, which also have on things like electricity projects, for example, have not been dealt into some of the benefits out of it. That's a quick, rapid response.
Thank you very much. And I've got a question for each of the panelists, but I'll invite the other panelists to answer that question as well if they want to add a little something to it. My next question is for Colleen. As a well-established, innovative company, Innergex, I'm interested in your advice for startups and entrepreneurs in this space. I'm from New Brunswick, and my city, Fredericton, has been recognized as one of the startup capitals of Canada. So I'm interested in your advice as an established, innovative company.
Sure, and I will answer that, but I cannot leave the prior question on the table. And I think just an example is to, again, get out of the silos. So the picture behind me is a wind farm in northern British Columbia that Innergex operates named Doki. And you can maybe see the ridge top where the project is has also been clear cut. So the wind farm went through a robust environmental assessment and carefully cleared little tiny squares around every wind turbine pad. And then under a different regime for how we manage ecosystem values and environmental impact, forestry went in and clear cut the ridge top. Not meaning to pick on forestry, but we have industries that we have accepted best management practices. We've internalized, we're okay with these impacts from it. Qualified environmental professionals sign off in the traditional industries, and then a new industry that is, relatively speaking, extremely low impact when you look right through what goes through an EA. And I've been involved in more than I'd like to number now on renewable energy projects across this country. We're getting very little value and very little additionality in terms of environmental protection from putting those projects through the robust process that was designed for something else. So just something to think about. If our policy imperative is we need more renewable energy to deal with climate, let's not save or lose the forest to save the tree, to use that example. So just thinking about how we're dealing with things across sectors. How to go from being a little innovative company to a big multinational. I think I would say, and I know this is common, but perseverance. I think it's your first project. You just have to hang on and not give up. And we're in a world where everyone likes to say no, it's different. We can't imagine how it could be possible. There's lots of experts that will say, nope, it's not feasible. We've always done things this way. And so you have to have a bit of that John F. Kennedy spirit of, we will put men on the moon by the end of the decade, even if the experts say it's not possible, and then just build on that, and it snowballs. And so Innergex started with one project, and it was our founding CEO did a lot of door knocking and had a lot of no's, but the company kept with it and built that trust with the community and built the first project. And then from the first project, it grew from Quebec and then into British Columbia and into Ontario, and then into the countries we're around the world. So entrepreneurial spirit is a unique and precious thing. And so I think just keep at it and keep that flame burning bright.
Thank you, Colleen. And certainly, I think for entrepreneurs and startups to connect with companies who are already in the space and doing great work is obviously important as well. I'm not seeing any raised hands. I have tons of questions myself. I'm going to ask Adam a question now, but if you have questions, either put them in the chat, folks, or raise your hand, and I will invite you to ask your question as well. Adam, you mentioned that 40% of cement exports are going to the U.S. Do you anticipate any change given the results of last night's election and predicted tariffs on many items?
Well, that is a perennial concern, I think, for all manufacturers in Canada. To date, cement has largely escaped some of those protectionist instincts, largely because of the integrated nature of the industry across the border. It's a lot of the same companies that are trading intermediary products, for example, across the Great Lakes, which helps a little bit, but also a lot of the policies that sort of adopt a made in USA type of lens are focused on finished products. And cement is, I think, largely because of our advocacy efforts, both here and on the other side of the border, understood to be an intermediary input into the final product, which is a concrete product that goes into construction. You know, whether that thinking will hold is anyone's guess. You know, going back to Marin's point about certainty and predictability, we're certainly entering an era of deeper uncertainty on that issue and many others. So, you know, I wouldn't say that we're not concerned, but if history holds, we should be okay. Not that we won't be fighting hard to make sure that that isn't the case, but historically we've managed to avoid the worst impacts of tariffs.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's a little bit of good news this morning.
Yeah.
I don't see any more questions. What I would like to do is thank our speakers today. Marin, the president of New Economy Canada, thank you so much for joining us today and your presentation. Colleen Giroir-Smith, Vice President Corporate Relations at Innergex, thank you very much for your time and expertise today. And of course, Adam Auer, President and CEO of the Cement Association of Canada. Appreciate your input and your insights. And of course, thank you to all the senators who have attended this morning, and to Mary Coyle for organizing this event. And hoping that everybody has a great day, and wishing you an excellent first day of having a new president in the United States. Again, thanks colleagues for joining us, and we will be circulating the PowerPoints and the presentation from today. And I would suggest too, if you'd like to if you think of any questions that you didn't get a chance to ask today, forward them to Senator Coyle's office, and we will reach out to our panelists today and invite them to answer those questions. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great day.